Today we're gonna see and enjoy a secret blitz match between Mikhail Tal, the magician of chess, against Garry Kasparov, one of the greatest players of all times. They played 14 games, and these games have never been published before. They were revealed by Garry's coach Nikitin some time ago, and today we're gonna see the highlights, best moments of this really stunning match. In the first game of the match, Tal was playing white against Kasparov playing black. It was black to move. Black clearly wants to develop the bishop and castle, and Garry played an aggressive move bishop c5. It turned out that it was better to play a more modest move bishop e7 while keeping the king covered, but bishop c5 looks more aggressive as it attacks the knight on d4. But here, Tal realized his trademark sacrifice, knight takes e6. The knight sack that came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden black is done. Now, what's the point? Well, black could capture this knight with either a pawn or a queen. Capturing with a pawn allows white to play bishop h5, which is check to the king, as well as discovered attack of this knight on e5. Which means that if black plays some move, white rooks become really active, and white can get their piece back, and as a result of that, the king is centralized, and white will easily, double down against this pawn on e6 with all the pieces he's got, and, black's gonna lose this game quickly. And if instead black decided to capture the knight by the queen, that wouldn't help either, because after bishop g4, there is a really fascinating position when white is pinning and over-pinning and overwhelming everything in black's position. This rook on e1 is doing a really great job attacking a bunch of black's pieces and pinning them all together along this e-file, and white's both bishops are putting pressure, as well as this rook on d1, so black is clearly overpowered here. For example, black cannot capture with the knight because that would drop the queen over here, and instead if black captures with a queen, white recaptures, and again the knight cannot move because it's pinned down to the king. And actually on the next move, queen takes d7 is coming because again the other knight is still pinned. So black here is completely devastated, and Tal won the first game. The second game was something out of this world, and that's why we love these guys. Tal and Kasparov, they were playing aggressive, complicated, tactical chess, and they reached the position where it's a complete mess. Everything is attacking everything. Both kings are somewhat exposed, especially the black king. The rook is attacking over here. Garry was playing white, by the way. Tal is black this time. And Kasparov played the move bishop to b3, which looks quite interesting. It actually opens up the attack to this queen, and at first it's not even clear where the queen could possibly go to. Maybe the queen is just trapped. But here, Tal the magician actually justified this title by playing something very magical. He played rook e1 check first, and after king to a2, he did nothing about this queen on c5, but just captured this pawn on b5. I guess it came as a total shocker. Kasparov took over here, and once again, Tal did not recapture there on c5 somewhere, but he played this in-between move rook a8, and it turns out that, strangely enough, it's quite inconvenient for white to counter this check. Notice that this rook cuts off the b1 square, therefore the king cannot go back, and actually the only thing white could do is to play bishop a4 and give up the bishop, but after rook takes, with one another check, the king can now go to b3. And only after that, Tal recaptured the rook with the pawn, with yet another checkmate in threat, pawn to c4. It's really fascinating how Tal could put together this checkmating pattern out of completely nothing. Now, c4 threat is coming. Garry played queen f5, very natural move to play, providing the c2 square for the king, as well as counter-attacking this bishop on f6. But Tal played rook e2, saying, hey, not so fast, I'm taking away this square, c4 is still coming. Now it looks like white is actually nearly lost, but Garry found a super great move, knight a5. I mean, kudos to these players. It's completely out of this world that a move like that could be found in a blitz game, and it's the 48th move of the game, therefore I assume that they were down on time, and that's the only move that saves white in the game. So Garry is truly great. What's the point? From here the knight controls the c4 square, therefore if pawn is pushed there, white can just capture it. And now black can't take by the pawn, they'll lose the rook. If they take by the rook, well, start capturing this bishop with a check, and it's probably bad for black. So let's take it back. So what did Tal do here? He played another magical move. This time, rook b4, sacrificing the rook in almost an endgame position. Now, crazily enough, the correct move for white is to ignore this rook and to play king a3. So after king to a3, the game, like surprisingly enough, could have ended with this perpetual check. But Gary was probably completely shocked by this rook sack, just captured it, but it turns out that after rook takes b2, check to the king, our bishop, which is still alive, is doing a great job, supporting our attack. King a3 is forced, and pawn takes b4 is a checkmate. That's how the game ended, and Tal won the second game in a row. In the third game of the match, Tal is playing white again. Currently he's down a pawn but more active, and as we expect from Tal, he tries to attack his opponent's king. He goes pawn h4, aiming pawn h5. Gary played bishop f6, very natural move, trying to eliminate this strong attacking bishop. And after this exchange on f6, looks like actually black is completely solid. But white played knight e5, queen d6, both are centralizing, and here comes pawn h5. Tal wants to open up the black king. Now, pawn captures, knight takes h5. Notice that this knight is guarded by the queen, and this knight is guarded by the rook. Therefore, black can't win any material. But Gary played a very good move, rook to d8, just centralizing. And it actually looks like black is fairly solid. If you look at all these pieces, they all defend each other. Looks like there's no danger for black. And yet, Tal takes another opportunity to shock black with knight takes g7. He wants to open up the king completely. Computer says that black should have stayed cool and just ignore this knight, but that's certainly a very complex thing for a human to do. Gary played a more natural king takes g7, and it's still not very clear how white can continue his attack, given the fact that this knight takes away these two squares. White can't easily, let's say, move the queen over there somehow, right? But Tal never shied away to sacrifice more material, to add more fuel to his attack, and he goes rook g4, check to the king. Turns out that black can grab the rook, but after that, the king is left completely lonely there on the king side, and white can just keep attacking it, and basically, white could of course deliver a perpetual check, but the rook lift is the end of the game. Rook h4 comes over here, and the king will be checkmated. So that's how Tal won the third game in a row, and it's now 3-0, 3-0, and quite a devastation of Gary. But now Gary realized that he needs to adjust. Being sick and tired of all these devastations, Kasparov realized that he needs to pivot, and he started to trade off pieces and play more tactical positions where Tal would have no opportunity to pull off those sudden combinations like a ball from the blue and keep destroying Gary. Now, in this case, I think it's quite a remarkable example of that. In this position, Tal was playing white against Gary's playing black, and white is up a pawn in an endgame. So this should be a winning position for white, right? And this was really funny because this reminded me my conversation with one of my coaches back in the day. I was coached by Melanyuk, who was one of the grandmasters back in the Soviet Union, and he knew Tal, and they played in different tournaments as well. And my coach told me that there was a joke among these players that if you're down a pawn against Tal in an endgame, that's at least equal. And this game proved it to be wrong, because it's hard to imagine that white could possibly lose this game, and yet ultimately this happened. Actually, Kasparov playing black ultimately won this game. So everyone has strong sides and weak sides. Tal was a really great attacking player, but he was not as good at endgames, and Kasparov found the way to start capitalizing on that. All in all, Kasparov managed to bounce back, and the score at this point was 3-3. So they both kind of understood the ground, understood their both strengths and weaknesses, and started playing more carefully. And this game was just a little bit funny, just showing you that even best players in the world are still humans. Now, Tal was playing white here. The position is quite symmetric, equal, and Tal played a natural move bishop a3, just trying to activate this dull bishop, as well as attack this rook on f8. And it would be a nice move, but it turns out that it is a blunder, because black's got rook to c3 with a double attack to this queen and the bishop, which means that white is just losing one of these pieces. And basically that's end of story, but there was still something funny down the line. Now, Tal just sacked the queen right here, and then grabbed the rook on f8, black recaptured, and Tal played knight f5. And what's funny about this move is that black can actually just grab this knight by the bishop, right? But Gary didn't. So what the heck, right? It's quite funny that two of the strongest players in the world are playing just like, us meta models. One is giving up the knight for nothing, and black is not taking. And it was funny that I guess that by this time, Kasparov had some kind of little bit of a fear of Tal and all his combinative abilities, so this total bluff actually worked out. Probably Kasparov thought that Tal's calculation was if bishop takes, here comes rook b8, check to the king, which is also cut off by this rook, and if knight covers, then rook takes e8 would be a checkmate. So probably Gary was already scared of something like this to take place, and he refused to take the knight. The reality is, in this position, black doesn't have to cover by the knight, he can cover by the bishop, and the bishop is defended by the queen, in this case black would have 2 extra minor pieces and would certainly win. Now, going back to the game, after Tal this bluffed with knight to f5, black actually got scared to take it. He instead played g6, but won the game anyway because he's got an extra bishop, and certainly for Garry Kasparov that's enough to win. This game is quite a great example of the art of attack. Tal is playing white against Kasparov is playing black, and although white is putting some pressure here, it's unclear how to move forward. The black bishop takes away this square, so the queen cannot go there. Also, black is putting pressure, to the rooks, so the queen cannot easily move away. Therefore, not that clear for white how to proceed further. Anyway, Tal just goes forward, h5. Garry correctly plays d5, so he can counterplay in the center of the board, because if he can open up the files there, he can start the counterattack against white's exposed king. But Tal ignores that and just goes queen h4. Garry took on e4, and I'm sure that 99% of players would just recapture, but not Tal. And there is a good reason for that. Usually, when you are executing your own plan, the best thing you can do is just to keep pushing with your own plan, because when you start being reactive to your opponent, you still slow down your own ideas, and you let your opponent execute his ideas. Such as in this case, if pawn takes e4 was played, Garry would probably go rook d8 and start to counterattack, and that's quite annoying. Therefore, instead of that, Tal just ignores that completely, and he found one more way to keep attacking. It's also not that clear, because the first idea h6 does not work. Like h6 looks really good for white. If they could open up this file, that would just win. But black would go g5, and it would turn out that h6 was a big blunder. That's just a double attack. White would lose material, and black's skin is completely safe. It's just sheltered by white's own pawn on h6. So that would be a big blunder for white. Instead, Tal plays a more sophisticated bishop g6. So he wants to block these pawns so that he can't ever go forward when we move our own pawn forward. And certainly black can't take, because this would be just a checkmate on the next move. So black can't do this, but Garry is also trying his best to counterattack. He just took here on d3, trying to double down on his own counterplay. He can either go there or try to push the pawn forward, and the position remains to be sharp. Once again, funnily enough, Tal ignores all that and just goes h6. He goes for this all-out attack, hoping for a checkmate. And here, after this exchange on g6, Garry tried to deliver a couple checks, but then he realized that checks are coming to an end. White can always cover this way. Black tried king h7, trying to somehow, counterattack the rook, but Tal was never shy away to sacrifice some material to get to the king, so he sacked the rook, and Garry resigned, because now the king is completely exposed, and on the next move it's going to be checkmated like this, so Garry resigned. Ultimately, the match came to an end, and it was 7-7, meaning a draw at the end. And we gotta give credit to Garry, because at the time he was actually only 15 years old. Of course, he was no pushover, he was still already one of the best players in the world, but he was not at his prime yet. Therefore, we could say that it's quite an accomplishment for Kasparov to draw against Mikhail Tal, who already was a very established player and a former world champ. Also, if you enjoyed this game, you might as well enjoy this video, where Garry Kasparov has been thinking for 83 minutes about a single move in his match against Karpov. That was quite an interesting and unique situation. Also, if you get value from these videos, consider subscribing and hitting the bell so that you'll always be the first to notified when new videos come out, and you'll be able to support the channel so that I can do my best to serve you in the future. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you soon.